Well, I think so. Okay, recording in progress. Hello, and welcome to a special meeting of the Visiting Lecture Series here in the Department of Philosophy and Religious Studies at the University of Macau. Special because, of course, it occurs outside the bounds of our normal schedule, so it's been an exciting week. We've had not one, but two visiting speakers, so thank you, Professor Demetriou, for helping to make this a special occasion for us. I would like to introduce you all to Professor Demetriou, who is a associate professor of philosophy at the University of Minnesota Morris. He is an ethicist and social political philosopher. He is, for instance, the co-editor of Honor in the Modern World, published with Lexington or Rowman and Littlefield Press in 2016, since which and prior to which he's published a number of articles and other works in fields such as sex ethics, monument ethics, the ethics of gun rights, and migration ethics. Today, Professor Demetriou is presenting a talk by the title Sexual Creepiness. So procedurally, things will be as usual. Professor Demetriou will speak for a while, then we will have an open Q&A. So with that, before he begins, I would like to ask you to join me in thanking him and welcoming him to the department.
Thank you very much, Ben, and I want to thank Victoria and everyone else who helped me come here and present these ideas to you. I'm really enjoying visiting your beautiful city and meeting some of you, and I'm hoping to meet more of you after the talk and hear what you're up to. This is one of the projects I'm up to, and I don't know how much this affects how much sexual creepiness is a meme, as it were, in your culture. In the Anglo-American world, it is a very big issue with not much literature behind it yet. So I'm trying to get in on the ground floor of this, what will inevitably be a very big topic. And just to motivate it for you, this would certainly motivate it for in the Anglo-American world, but you know, it's not like any of you is worried that you're going to sexually assault somebody. Maybe you're worried that you may be thought to be sexually harassing, but you probably think you're in control of that one, that you're not going to sexually harass anybody, and you're not going to be accused of doing so if the person's being fair-minded. But lots of us, especially heterosexual men, are probably worried about being called creepy. And especially if we're highly conscientious, we're probably worried about being called creepy. If you're not so conscientious, probably not. To get an idea of how much how deeply that worry goes, in recent polls, over half of American men are worried about being creepy or being called creepy when they ask a girl out. Okay, so majority of American men, 69% say fear of being labeled creepy impacts how they interact with women, and half say fear of being labeled creepy reduces the likelihood they even approach a woman to ask her out. Okay, and I teach a sex ethics class, and I ask my students, you know, are you worried about this? Does this affect how you approach dating? And yeah, this reflects what I see. It's a major concern. If you do a Google Ngram on how often the word creepy is being used in the culture, you see a huge spike and recently. So, I mean, I remember these days, and we didn't really use the term creepy that much. Okay, so something interesting is going on in the culture here that we need to explain. And the first groundbreaking psychological study of creepiness was done in 2016 by a psychologist named Francis McAndrew and I think a student of his, Sarah Cohnke, but I should be careful about that, I'm not sure. And they, you know, just try to figure out, well, what are the main things that people call creepy? And it's a pretty good study, it has a lot of respondents. It was international, and they conclude, we're going to look at some of the things that they found to be common elicitors of creepiness, but they conclude that they try to like understand what the root is of this phenomenon. So they hypothesize that being creeped out, the feeling that somebody is being creeped out, is an evolved adaptive emotional response to ambiguity about the presence of threat that enables us to maintain vigilance during times of uncertainty. So we may talk about this later, but really for them, the feeling of being creeped out by somebody isn't the feeling that somebody is a potential threat. Like, oh, is that a gun that he has in his shirt? Like, it's not, can't tell. That doesn't really elicit creepiness, potential threat. It's this phenomenon of ambiguity of threat, that somebody is sort of phase shifting, like a duck rabbit illusion, right? Between being completely safe and being threatening. And that uncertainty about whether to categorize somebody as threatening or not at all seems to be the elicitor, seems to be the sort of phenomenology of creepiness. Here are some things that they found. We'll see if you agree. Certain professions, they said, what professions? They gave people like a whole list of professions to choose from and rank them. And the professions that people found to be particularly creepy: being a clown, being a taxidermist, being a sex shop owner. Those were the most creepy professions. Certain hobbies, weirdly, hobbies that involve collecting were tended to be viewed as more creepy, especially dolls or body parts. Apparently some people maybe collect body parts or keep their teeth that have fallen out, or toenail clippings. Certain physical traits like greasy hair, long greasy hair especially, bulging eyes, being tall and skinny, having particularly white skin. When it comes to behaviors, steering conversations to sex, or steering conversations to sex too early, watching a person across a room before interacting with them, avoiding eye contact, or staring at someone's eyes a little too intently. So they, as I said, conclude that the essence of creepiness is ambiguous threateningness, and they feel that this explains some other features that we see with regard to creepiness, which is that men are judged to be far more creepy than women. Both women and men agree on this. That men with weird hobbies are creepy, presentations that involve anything that has a mask appearance, so you can see why clowns are creepy. And why young reproductive, this is going to be key for us, that young reproductive age women are, so like college women, are the ones who are by far the most likely to judge somebody as creepy. All right, so like if you group together all the accusations that somebody is creepy, most of them are going to come from young women. So here's a naive response to this phenomenon, which is that, well, wait a minute. If creepiness is about ambiguous threat, and if sexual creepiness is a manifestation of creepiness in a sexual context, then, well, sexual creepiness is going to be ambiguous sexual threat. And since it's normally bad to be sexually threatening, it's going to be morally, let's use this hedge word, problematic. It's going to be morally problematic to be ambiguously sexually threatening. Okay, so it's fair to say that we have at least a weak prima facie moral obligation to avoid being creepy. I'm going to stand on here because you guys can at least see that and it won't be in your way. All right, so let's learn how not to be sexually creepy, everybody. And here's Frank McAndrew, who had that breakout study. And he has this Psychology Today article on helping guys like me avoid being creepy. All right. And I'm just going to quote passages from it because we're going to mine this for a lot of, this is going to be a lot of grist for our mill later on. It says, let's face it, it does not take very much for a guy to look like a creep. Women, on the other hand, really have to show you something spectacular before the word creepy is used to describe them. So we see this asymmetry between men and women being creepy. That's interesting. And he says, you know, Well, this probably has to do with the fact that women are especially young women, are more vulnerable to sexual assault and more targeted for sexual assault than men are. And, but I want to make a distinction between a creep and a pervert. You can be creepy for a lot of reasons, but I propose he says that a pervert is a creep who sets off alarm bells because he poses some sort of sexual threat. In other words, a pervert has sex on his mind, and it's probably sex that is unusual, deviant, and possibly dangerous. Okay, and then he talks about a serial killer. Later on in the article, he talks about how good-looking men with strong social skills can typically get away with a lot more than awkward guys can, or unattractive men with unusual and less attractive physical traits. And this is true, that two men performing the exact same behaviors, one will be judged creepy, and one won't, based upon their looks. Okay, that's something we should take note of. There are other demographic variables like age and race make it more or less likely that you're going to be viewed as creepy. So for instance, middle-aged men, 30 to, well, I shouldn't say men, but men from 30 to 50 are more likely to be viewed as creepy. That's than men older and younger. Then he talks about this oldness issue. A lot of the elicitors of creepiness is older men going after younger women. So men, say my age, going after a college-age woman. And he talks about this important study of OkCupid data that kind of reflected some interesting dynamics about who goes after who. And we see, like, all right, women tend to like men around their ages. When they're younger, they like men a little bit older. Then when they get older, they maybe like men a little bit younger, but roughly the same age. But men are, no matter what their age, always sexually interested for short-term mating with a young woman, say college age, around 22. All right. Now, if they're looking for a relationship, they do sort of track what's called the 50% +7 rule. Any of you know about this rule? That basically you shouldn't go below, if you're a man, you shouldn't go after a woman for a long-term relationship who's younger than 50% of your age +7. So if I'm 50 years old, I shouldn't go after a woman who's younger than 32. Okay. And men are sort of tracking like the very lowest. They limit the limits of that. So they are going after women right at that line. So listening to all this, you may have a different sort of response than the naive response, right? The naive response was, oh, I don't want to be sexually dangerous, so I don't want to be ambiguously sexually dangerous, so I shouldn't be creepy. After you start learning all this stuff about what gets called creepy, and especially the way that handsome guys get away with doing the same stuff that unattractive guys don't, you could start being kind of a skeptic about creepiness, right? So-called incels, right? Men who are, incel is a portmanteau. It's a combination of two English words, in for involuntary, cel for celibate. So men who are involuntary celibates. Okay, well, like, that's a lot of men. Not all of them identify as incels. Incels are sort of it's like a political or sort of ideological group, okay, who are involuntary celibates and angry about it and feel that it reflects a, sort of dysfunction in the culture. All right. They understand themselves as a sort of victimized group. And they have a whole incel Wikipedia for incels, called Incel Wiki. And if you go to the Incel Wiki for creepiness, they say things like this: the term is intentionally ambiguous. Women know that if they were being completely honest and said, quote, ugly short guys should eat dust, they would be viewed unfavorably and shallow. Therefore, in order to shift blame, or to covertly act like a chameleon and having, I'm sorry, but the English isn't good, but I'm just going to read what they say. Having a constantly moving goalpost with regards to their moral compass. And ambiguous terms such as creepy is a welcome adjective in the chameleon's vocabulary. All right. And so, they're just like, look, this is basically, let me give a summary here, but basically what they're saying is creepiness is a slur for ugly guys asking girls out. It's that simple. It's nothing more. Let's not let's not polish the turd here. It's just a slur for ugly guys trying to live their lives and do what handsome guys get to do, which is just ask a girl out. All right. So that's a sort of skeptical response. Now, I don't want to say that the only skeptics about creepiness are incels, because that's not true. Heidi Matthews is a respected legal Canadian scholar, and she wrote a viral essay for Aeon magazine in which she agrees that, it basically is a slur for not just unattractive guys, but it goes deeper than that. And that, look, if we're consistent about our values, especially if you're a good liberal or a good progressive and you're consistent about your views, you're going to have a problem with creepiness normativity. This is a term that you should sort of cut out of your vocabulary, just like you should cut out of your vocabulary like sluttiness and other things that doesn't really align with liberal values. All right, so I'm just going to take some quotes from this essay. She says, she points out a bunch of things. She says, well, look, there's this evidence in the early psychological research, because again, there still isn't much, and she wrote this a couple of years ago. But she said there's evidence that this sort of creepiness detector isn't very reliable. So if you think like, oh, feeling the creeps is this, this spidey sense, as she puts it, right? Spider-Man sense, the spidey sense that, there's this guy could be dangerous. It's not very reliable. All right. It's really, she says, probably tracking social distance or otherness. When we judge a situation or person creepy, we participate, she says, in shunning and social ostracism. Creepiness can prevent us from responding to the odd, the new, or the peculiar with attitudes that she feels are more progressive and liberal, with curiosity, interest, and generosity of spirit. All right? As researchers warn, what most people intuit to be creepy aligns closely with the attitudes of individuals or populations already beyond the boundaries of social acceptability. The mentally ill and disabled are indeed viewed as creepy, like, like the people, like homeless people with drug addictions on the street or something like that. The mentally ill and disabled, the physically deformed, those with tics, that's a typo. It should be just TIC, but, like if they have Tourette's and they, have a tic, or other abnormal movements or facial features, the impoverished and the homeless are all more likely to be judged creepy, and that's true. If we allow creepiness, she says, to stand in for, these are her words, not mine, if we allow creepiness to stand in for principled, normative assessment, we want of the type of sex we want to hold up as socially valuable, it will be at the expense of historically sexually marginalized groups, the queers, the perverts, which she means in a positive way here, like, kinksters. The BDSM, it stands for bondage and sadomasochism, people who like leather and chains and tying people up and spanking and stuff like that. And others who find joy and meaning in the sexually experimental. Perhaps, she says, instead of spending so much energy excluding creeps, we should all turn our gaze inward and ask, in words of this Radiohead song from my generation, I'm a creep, I'm a weirdo, what the hell am I doing here? So in other words, like, just stop it with the creepiness stuff. It doesn't align with our values. It isn't maybe fun to think about because, this is, maybe she's writing to women and maybe she's saying, oh yeah, you women, you really liked it when we made it socially unacceptable to call women sluts because that benefited you, but you have to be consistent. right? And also stop using terminology and stop judging people according to behaviors that when they're being excluded wrongly. Okay, again, according to liberal and progressive values. So I just want to quickly summarize where we're at here. The liberal and progressive, and these are different somewhat, but they're both this sort of non-traditional, non-conservative positions, both egalitarian, both liberal especially more individualistic, right? Progressive more interested in outgroups and elevating outgroups and including outgroups and those lower down. Against creepiness is that, well, first of all, it's an unreliable detector of sexual threat. Now, this is something that Heidi Matthews notes, but let me just riff on it for a bit. Liberals don't like racial profiling, at least when it's done by the state, right? So they want government officials, they want policemen to view an individual by how that individual behaves. If that individual is behaving in some way that looks threatening, okay, we treat that individual accordingly. But if they just fall into a demographic that tends to do more violence or something like that, they shouldn't be treated differently. So for instance, Black Americans commit 10 times the amount of murders per capita than white Americans do. And white Americans commit more murders per capita than Asian Americans do. Okay. But though, most liberals and progressives are against racial profiling of Black men, right? Because they're individualists. And, well, if that Black man isn't doing anything dangerous, you shouldn't stop him and frisk him to see if he has a gun or ask him why he's in that side of town or anything like that. Okay. Well, but wait, they are as a group on, committing more crimes on average, right? But that doesn't matter, right? So likewise, even if sexually creepy men are more dangerous than sexually non-creepy men, if you're going to be consistent throughout, then you need to just worry about whether that guy, even if he looks a little goofy, don't judge him as being a sexual threat just because he looks a little goofy until he does something that's actually sexually threatening. The fact that he has long greasy hair or long fingernails or something like that should not cause you to call him by a name that is ostracizing or reputation damaging. It's sexist. Look, I mean, a lot of people, especially progressives, are into equity, right? Which means, well, they kind of are looking for equal outcomes. They're worried that, half the people in the jails are Black when Black Americans are only 13% of the population. They feel that shows that there's some sort of systemic racism. All right. They worry that there are more men in the math department, more male professors than female professors in the math department. That shows, when they're half the population, that shows some sort of systemic sexism. Well, if you're worried about, if you're into equity, you should be worried that almost everyone who gets called creepy is a man. It's ageist. In other words, it's prejudicial against people on the basis of their age. It condemns old men seeking relationships with young women. What on liberal grounds is wrong with that? Right? If Jack likes Jill and wants to ask her out for a date, why should it matter that Jack is old? Why doesn't he get to ask Jill out? It's lookist, right? It treats people differently on the basis of their mere looks. Good-looking men get away with stuff. Unattractive men don't. It stigmatizes the neurodivergent, again, people with tics. One of the things that keeps coming up is that if you tend to be a little autistic, if you have a mild case of autism, if you have Asperger's, if you're somewhere on the spectrum, these are all words that we throw around a lot in the West, you're way more likely to misunderstand social norms, all right, and be labeled creepy if you're a man. It's not it doesn't take a casual approach about sex. So especially now, this is probably more true of the liberals than the progressives, but there is a big strain in liberal sex ethics that is called sex positivity, right? And it's, your sex is a good thing, and we should be fine with people trying to have good sex lives, right? And we shouldn't be sort of terrifying people about their sex lives. What matters is that it's consensual and so forth, and it should be kind of celebrated. And we should take a casual approach towards sex. We should view sex as any sort of activity. There are sort of sex ethicists or sex educators, I should put it, in this tradition, who you could, there's a TED talk with millions of views of a guy saying, hey, we should think about sex like asking someone out for sex, and negotiating about sex like negotiating about getting dinner together and sharing a pizza, right? Well, this certainly doesn't do that. It's not casual at all about sex. It treats sexual approach as scary and different from other sorts of social interaction. And it is vanilla normative. Oh, I love this one. I had to find it. I find vanilla normativity to be a funny term, but people who are into kinky sex and BDSM call those who are just not vanilla. They call that vanilla sex, which is a bit of a slur itself, but I'm having a lot of fun here. So it's vanilla normative. It's saying people into kinky sex who are way more likely to be viewed as creepy are doing something wrong, when unless you're vanilla normative, you don't see them as doing something wrong. So this is the case, the most comprehensive case I can make against sexual creepiness. If you are a liberal or progressive, you should be suspicious of it. All right. So what should the liberal or progressive do if they want to maintain their liberal and progressive values and feel good about themselves, and yet continue to think to keep this bit of normativity, to keep creepiness in their lexicon and continue to call people creepy? Well, you could say this, and this is stuff that I've actually heard already in presenting this talk just a couple times earlier. Look, the problem isn't creepiness per se. It's how it's being weaponized by some people, right? So there is this real idea of creepiness. And then there's a lot of people just sort of capitalizing on this term to achieve political goals or elevate themselves individually or hurt those they don't like. So that's weaponization, okay? It's just being weaponized by some young women to hurt the feelings of men that they're mad at. Okay? So for instance, to take it out of the draw an analogy, if left-handed men like calling red-headed women unjust, you wouldn't say, oh, we have to stop using the word injustice, because left-handed men have this animus against red-headed women. No, you would just say, well, left-handed men have this little social problem where they have this animus against red-headed women, and you got to be careful. You can't take too seriously when a left-handed man calls a red-headed woman unjust. Likewise, we don't have to get rid of creepiness. We just have to be really skeptical about young women calling ugly or awkward men creepy. They're just weaponizing that. That's one thing you could say. But what if, I'm not sure that strategy is going to work, because what if left-handed men were the ones that almost exclusively were using the term injustice? All right, we all use the term injustice. But what if left-handed men were the only ones using the terms injustice for the most part, and they were directing it at red-headed women? You probably wouldn't say they were weaponizing this term injustice. You would probably say, oh, this is a term that left-handed men have, a slur that left-handed men have for red-headed women. That's what you would say. And that's more analogous perhaps to what's going on with the word creepiness. There's also another rescue, which we'll call the misuse strategy. And I've heard this. Look, people aren't always great about how they use the term. There is a totally legitimate sense of creepiness where someone is actually doing something wrong. But then there's this other sloppier uses that are inaccurate. And those sloppier uses are the illiberal uses. The legitimate uses are the real uses. Maybe. We have to do more linguistic studies of how, how and when that term is used. But we cannot forget that the meaning of a term is determined by the use of the term. And if we look at how the term is being used, it does seem to be quite widespread and quite kind of core that it is being used in these illiberal ways. So I just wanted to alert you to those possible rescues. Maybe that's a way that you will go in your own research if you dig into this yourself, and maybe it's correct. But these are some strategies and some worries I have about those strategies. Well, maybe those strategies don't work. Maybe those rescues don't work. And maybe if you're a good progressive and liberal, you should just stop using the term. And that's where Matthews goes. Just abandon creepiness talk. I want to give another sort of rescue strategy, all right, on behalf of the liberal or progressive. And it begins by noting that, and this is sort of conservative, ironically, point from the philosopher Edmund Burke, who said, there are a lot, he has this, I think he has this saying, and Victoria could correct me, but like, traditions are solutions to problems that we don't even know about, or something like that. That's a bad, I should have actually memorized the quote, but we have a lot of social conventions that are solutions to problems we don't even know exist. And if we discontinue those traditions, or we are going to find out that they were actually useful after all, too late, after we've already ruined society. So maybe I suggest before we drop creepiness normativity, we should figure out like why it's useful. Why is there that spike? Is it serving some good social service before we get rid of it? Because if it is serving some good social purpose, even if it's not so consistent with liberalism, maybe we should still keep it. We can't perhaps be completely consistent liberals. And it wouldn't be just in service of creepiness. We do this in other ways. For instance, in America, there's this growing movement to not hug your kids without permission. And you could see why on liberal grounds they would say that, right? I mean, it's like you just don't touch people without their permission. I'm going to touch Ben without permission, but I'm in Macau, I could get away. You don't just touch people without permission, and your kids are a person, right? And you just don't touch them without permission. So you ask, can I give you a hug, and so forth. All right, maybe. I think it's a little weird, but now you do have very consistent liberals and progressives saying, that, whereas I and you might go to grandma's house and be like, okay, hug your grandma. And okay, maybe grandma smells a little funny or whatever, but you go hug your grandma. And the kid's like, I don't want to hug grandma. Go hug your grandma. Okay. I mean, that's how normal people behave. But I mean, if you're being a consistent liberal, you could see the argument of, well, little Jill doesn't want to hug you, grandma. And maybe maybe tomorrow, try again. But that at what point? I mean, little babies will literally die if you don't touch them. All right, because this actually, we know this because about 100 years ago, when we were really starting to understand that contagious diseases kill people, we actually had orphanages where they just were trying to be very hygienic and place kids in the orphanage and place them in their little bassinets and wouldn't touch them, had told the nurses not to touch them so they wouldn't pass on disease, and like half the kids died. Kids need touch. They need their diapers changed. So you're touching their sexual organs without permission, but you have to do that or they're going, right? So we need to start making accommodations. And of course, philosophers have all these workarounds of, for paternalistic sort of interventions that attempts to sort of reconcile it with consent and so forth. But, reality sometimes doesn't align. The needs of reality don't align always with our moral codes. Another great example is just caging people. What can be more liberal than putting a human being in a cage? Liberalism is about freedom. That's what the word means. And you're literally putting a person in a cage. How could you do that? Well, there are serial killers. And the alternative is just too costly. So we're just going to put some people in a cage and just accept it. Okay. So likewise, we might need to figure out, look, is there going to be some big social cost of getting rid of this sort of mental cage that we have of creepiness, letting men out of that cage? All right. So let me give you a story about how that could be what's going on. That spike in creepiness usage might be actually serving some social purpose. There's this phrase I want you to know from evolutionary biology called exaptation. Okay. Exaptation is one of the ways that we evolve and anything evolves. And what happens is that a trait evolves for purpose number one, and then that trait, although it didn't at all evolve for purpose number one, turns out to be useful for purpose number two, which could be radically different, and starts getting selected for, starts giving you some sort of evolutionary advantage for that new purpose. Okay. So for instance, that's how feathers developed. All right. So feathers first appeared on flightless dinosaurs. Why? We don't really know. It was almost certainly had something to do with sexual selection. All right. So just being fancy and attracting females. All right. So, or maybe for warmth, right? But we don't know. But, if you had elaborate enough feathers, at some point, maybe if you were also a dinosaur that also climbed up in trees to hide, having a lot of feathers could actually help you jump further, maybe from tree to tree, much like flying squirrels, right? Who just have these long skin flaps and it helps them fly from tree to tree. Okay. And then, well, wait a minute. If you could fly a little further than I could fly to a little bit of a further tree, you're going to escape more predators. Now I have a fitness advantage. Now I start out reproducing you. Now, before you know it, right, my species is being selected for something that's like gliding rather than just, right, these feathers serve a dual purpose. They're sexy and useful for fleeing. And it goes on until next thing you know, I have feathers that are useful for flight. So it could be, right, that this isn't just true for biology. It could also be true for normative systems. All right. So it could be that a normative system that evolved to handle one sort of social problem could turn out to be useful for another sort of social problem. And we already, there's already plenty of examples of that in the literature of people believing that certain sort of moral norms develop from other sorts of norms. For instance, like moral disgust might have this sort of, sometimes you judge an action to be not just unjust, or maybe not unjust at all, but you find it to be a morally disgusting act. Probably, for instance, the prime example is going to be something like incest. That what happened here is that we kind of recruited moral disgust from literally physical disgust, all right, which was designed to help us avoid feces in rotten animals that our ancestors were scavenging, and skin diseases. All right. So my hypothesis is that when we're looking at this spike of creepiness usage, what we're looking at is social exaptation, moral exaptation in real time. We're seeing this happening right now. And so here's the view. There are various modern stressors young women have that they did not used to have in the West. There's a liberalized sexual marketplace. We're going to talk about all this. Liberal sexual egalitarianism. So there's more sexual freedom to ask a girl out on a date than there used to be. And sexual proposition is more normalized. Liberal sexual egalitarianism, that means that we are all equal, and so we're all allowed to ask if we're interested. All right. It isn't just that the right guys get to ask at the right time, like men of your social strata or higher or something like that, but anybody, or men of roughly your wealth, or men of your looks. So like if you're a 7, that a man who's just a 2 because of egalitarianism. Dating apps and technology, more unmarried men, more poly men. This has added to the stress that young women have, being sexually propositioned more than they used to. Add to this that this is an unstable social equilibrium point. Okay, so this is unsustainable for young women to deal with this much sexual attention from men that they're not interested in or aren't up to snuff for them. So too much sexual proposition on young women, too little interest in older women. So again, in a hyper liberalized sexual culture, if men are free to ask who they want to ask out, or sexually proposition who they're going to ask out, they're going to overwhelmingly focus all that attention on young women, as we've already touched on. So creepiness norms changed to fight that, right? To militate against that. Creepiness norms were recruited to get men to what I'm going to call pre-filter themselves, and to redirect older men to away from younger women, back to older women. All right, let's talk about that. You guys know this meme, maybe. It's called the silent defender meme. So basically, substandard suitors and unwanted sexual proposition, traditional courtship norms protected young women from this stuff in various ways. All right, so it's going to be, the details will differ from culture to culture, but the function is basically the same in any culture. A whole bunch of traditional courtship norms protected young women, like this. You have to ask the parents before you ask her out on a date. If it even has a dating culture at all, it may be just an arranged marriage culture. Okay. You don't here's a traditional norm. If I'm poor and you're rich, I don't get to ask you out. Okay. If I am right, so if I'm not of the same social class as you or better, I don't get to ask you out. Okay. I don't get to go out with you privately. There were no cars, right? If I want to go out with you, I ask you out. Or ask your parents if I could ask you out. Maybe they say yes. Okay, I take you out, and your sister's with you, or your aunt, and she's literally in the side, corner of the room knitting while you and I talk about nonsense, and it doesn't get too provocative, and I don't put my hand on your knee and so forth, right? Because your aunt's right there. The chaperone culture. These are many traditional ways, and we have people in the audience here who can go on at length about how that works. Young women can't go out alone in public, things like that. Right? A lot of things we don't like. Other things are good girl, bad girl distinctions. You don't even try to have sex with a good girl. You try to marry a good girl. Sex is had with prostitutes. All right. So for instance, this is not a very flattering story to tell perhaps, but it's a true story. But, my dad was old when he was my age when he had me. So we're dealing with a much older world. But when my dad was courting my mom, he absolutely did not try to have sex with her before marriage. But my dad loved prostitutes. He'd go to prostitutes all the time. And my mom told me that one time my dad took her on a date, stopped at a whorehouse, had sex with a prostitute quickly, came back out and continued the date. All right. And she didn't care because she wasn't threatened by she was not competition with a prostitute, okay, by any stretch of the imagination. All right. This is a good girl, bad girl distinction, right? So these are all ways that you protect women from this unwanted sexual imposition. And of course, in monogamous cultures, monogamy also did, because there's, only so many unmarried men around. All right. And the married men are off the market. Okay. So there are all these ways that you limited sexual proposition to young women and made sure that basically they were going to get the ones that did make it through that filtering system were maybe eligible for marriage. All right, but enter the modern world, right? We have a liberalized sexual marketplace. And liberal sex ethics are going to be like liberal economics, all right? Which is an unregulated marketplace, right? So here's a very unregulated marketplace. If you go to many countries in the third world, right, it's you have hawking culture. People have tissues and all sorts of food, and they go up to your car every time your car stops, or you're walking down the sidewalk and they're offering you stuff. And it's hard to see on a truly free market picture what's wrong with that, right? Hey, you want this stuff, you want this watch, you want this purse, you want these cookies, you want these crackers, you want this napkin. And, you got to constantly be saying, no, no, thank you. No, leave me alone. No, it's very annoying, but it is free market. It is a liberalized marketplace. So likewise, a truly liberalized marketplace would be a sort of hawking culture of sex. Some girl's cute. Hey, would you like to have sex with me? Okay. Have a nice day. I mean, be polite about it. Don't be threatening about, hey, would you like to have sex with me? No. Okay, well, have a nice day. Because who knows, maybe she'll say yes, right? And maybe only 1 out of 100 people will buy those little napkins you're selling, but someone is, right? And that's all you need. Just got to keep hustling for it, right? That would be a fully liberalized marketplace. And it's hard to see under a free market picture of liberalized sex ethics of what's wrong with that, other than the fact that it totally makes it miserable if you're a person who's sexy, right? If you're a young woman, life becomes very hard, right? Just like if you're a rich person in one of these third world countries, and I know this, right? Because if they see me and they see I'm white, they assume I have a lot of money, which I don't, but they think it, and so I'm constantly approached for these sorts of things. So on this sort of marketplace, you're free to decline, but others are free to propose. But of course, the burdens of that fall disproportionately on young women. Sexual egalitarianism. Progressives are very egalitarian. They think, hey, we're all equals, and they don't like talking about differences between people. They don't like saying some people are smarter than others. They don't like saying people are more talented than others. They don't like the idea that some are like better than others. It's very repugnant to an egalitarian ethos. All right. Well, if you apply that ethos to sexuality, then the obvious conclusion is that nobody is sort of out of your league sexually, and nor should you see anybody out of your league. Some ugly guy stumping around with one leg on or whatever else. You shouldn't say, oh, well, I'm a 10 out of 10. I'm part-time modeler and stuff like that. What is it? No. There are no leagues. Everyone is in your league. One of the most important sex ethics essays written in the last decade or so by Amia Srinivasan at Oxford, called The Right to Sex. She argues this on behalf, she says there's a problem here in that she's speaking on behalf of transgender people who are having a hard time finding mates. And she wants to say, it's a very delicate line she's walking, because like she starts off talking about incels being mad that pretty girls won't go out with them, and they seem to act like they have a right to sex. And she starts off saying kind of normal things that you hear from a progressive against them. But then she says, but they do kind of have a point, because we progressives say sort of the same, want to say some of the same things in favor of disabled people, in favor of fat people, and in favor of transgender people having, in some sense, a right not to be totally excluded from the mating market. And we need to maybe change our attitudes towards the fat, towards the ugly, towards the transgender and the disabled. So there's something there, right? And she tries to, I'll leave it up to you to see whether she navigates that successfully to still keep the incels out and to get the disabled in. But, I'm just trying to bring this up to point out to you that the sexual egalitarianism idea is real on the progressives, among progressives. So, you could see why a lot of unattractive or older men or whatever would feel like, well, look, if really we are all equal, I do get to ask that attractive young woman out. Technology, phones, social media, dating apps, OnlyFans, all these things expose young women to vast amounts of undiluted sexual proposition that women of previous generations did not get. Okay, so I'm not going to poll you guys, but I'll tell you, in America, when I ask my students, how many of you have received unsolicited dick pics? Like every single one of my female students has received an unsolicited dick pic. And I see some of you nodding that you think this is not like a crazy proposition, but it is, so it's just true. Let alone if you go on a dating app like Tinder or something like this, it's ding, 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 ding for the girls, for the young women. All right, that's not what the experience for the men, but that is the experience for the women, right? And they like the attention. If they're monetizing it like OnlyFans, they like the money, right? And they certainly like the attention from the right guys. And these apps do allow you to expand your dating circle from just the guys you know in your neighborhood to the whole country, right? And you can find, like any marketplace, a better man than you otherwise would have because your search has expanded. But nonetheless, that means a lot of people that you also don't want attention from are also going to give attention to you. So young women now are in the position of almost being a minor what would in the past be a minor celebrity. Okay, they're getting that much attention, and just like celebrities, they want some buffers between them and their fans. Okay, we also see, remember when we talked about monogamy? Fewer and fewer men are getting married. All right, so just marriage rates are going down. That means more and more men are unmarried. That means more and more men are on the market. That means they're looking for women. Okay, so there's just a higher percentage of the population is looking for women, and given their choices, they're going to be interested in young women. More and more men who are married are polyamorous, okay, which means there's space in their lives for another woman, and they're going to tend to prefer a younger woman to cycle in and out of their polyamorous relationship. This is a funny Reddit post about this couple who's in their 30s, all right, and they opened up their relationship to other people, okay, and but so this woman was okay with her husband, bringing a third in their polyamorous relationship, but she found out that he went after a 19-year-old. I couldn't help notice that this girl was 19. My husband is 36. I told him he needed to tell women that he's married and not misguide them, but he's refused to change, saying, you don't understand how hard it's meant to date. When I asked him why he's seeing teens, he said they're easier to train. So, there's this, they're going after young women if you're going to be poly. So there's all this means this growing block of people are going to go after the young women. So because of all these forces, the liberalization, the declining marriage norms, and so forth, what if young women say, you know what, I'm going to take some of the burden off myself of saying, no, thank you, no, thank you, no, thank you, have a nice day, no, thank you, not interested, no, thank you. What if I just lowered the burden on myself and perpetuated an idea in the culture that kept men who don't really have a good shot at me at all from even bothering me in the first place? That's what I call pre-filtration. What if I could get it in men's heads around me, like say I'm a very attractive woman, I'm an 8 out of 10. What if I could get all the men who are like 7 and below in the culture to, before they walk up to me, say, no, I better not, because it's bad to do that, before they even talk to me? That would save me a lot of emotional work. That's pre-filtration. You sabotage your own chances with me. You just leave me alone because there's only 1 out of 1,000 chance. Okay. And so since being labeled creepy is reputationally costly for men, it behooves young women then, it would be advantageous for them To have a norm in which substandard suitors, even if not being creepy about their own would-be solicitations, reduce the pressures on young women. All right. Redirection hypothesis works along the same lines. If you could convince older men that it was creepy and reputationally costly to go after younger women, then they will move back up to approaching older women. All right. So lots of accusations you hear of sexual creepiness are what we'll call third party. Jill is not creeped out by Jack. She's happy with him. Leonardo DiCaprio with a 20, right? He's the famous case. Older than me, is in his 50s, only dates women in their 20s. And right, but they're quite happy because he's quite handsome and rich. But he gets called a creep. All right. So what's that? It's a third party accusation. Okay. So these are sometimes called May-December romances in the West, right? And so it makes sense to propagate a norm if you're an older woman that discourages men who might be not gross at all. Okay, they're not gross. They're actually attractive older men that you would want to marry or have a relationship with. And it keeps them from going after the 20-year-olds. It gets them back to you. All right. So plausibly, part of the creepiness norm is about redirecting eligible, not goofy looking, but eligible older men back to older women. All right. So we're going to start wrapping up now. I want to go back to weaponization real quick. Weaponization of moral norms is a real thing. In fact, some theorists think that that's what morality evolved to do, just as a way of social control, of hurting your enemies and helping your friends. But what if there are like offensive and defensive uses of weapons, of weaponization, moral weaponization, right? So in a sense, to be sympathetic to young women here and to older women, be sympathetic to women generally here. What if the liberalization of our culture plus technological advances just put them in an untenable position? And they reached for what they had to stop that. And what they had was this creepiness norm. And they could use this in a new way to protect themselves from the added harms of these two developments of liberalism and technology. Well, if so, we still have to worry about good use of weapons, just like necessity, proportionality. We have to worry about that when we're talking about real violence with real weapons. We should also talk about that with respect to weaponization of norms. That's where that discussion needs to go. So maybe what the good progressive or liberal should do is say this: look, I don't actually believe really in creepiness. I don't believe it's really wrong, but I do still endorse the norm because the norm is socially useful. And so this is what ethicists call, meta-ethicists call fictionalism, right? So an analogy here might be like, suppose you're an atheist, but you do a lot of social science and you you look around you and you start concluding, I kind of put myself in this camp, that human beings kind of need religion. Maybe you don't, but in general, they kind of need religion. And even though it's strictly speaking false, if you're an atheist, right? Even if you think it's strictly speaking false, maybe actually we should have it. And that means certain sorts of moral normativity, like sin talk. Oh, it's a sin to eat this. It's a sin to do this on a certain sort of day, whatever. It's sin to do this with your left hand or whatever. But people need all this sort of stuff to maintain social control and maintain social cohesion, or continue to have babies or whatever. So likewise, you may say, look, this is just a concession we have to make. So in conclusion, I think sexual creepiness, I've said, either itself as a moral category, or at least the emerging norms around accusations of it, is in tension with liberal and progressive sexual values. And I hypothesize that it might be all told justifiable if it serves an important social good, okay? And that social good may be that it relieves sexual burdens on young women created by technology and the decline of traditional sexual mores. and that it redirects men in ways that accusers find socially or personally beneficial. And so I leave it up to you, if you accept this sort of framework, to figure out for yourselves. I'm not going to opine upon that, but to figure out for yourselves whether or not it is actually all told worth it, given whatever benefits it may provide, right? It's just a framework for thinking about this question. All right, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much. We do have some time for Q&A. Now, I'll just say very quickly that formally speaking, this ends at 3 p.m. That being said, there was a little bit of a hiccup getting everything set up technologically. So for those who would be willing to stay, we could potentially try to go a few minutes past 3 p.m. But at any rate, let's just get things underway. I'm happy to start building up a queue. As usual, I'll try to attend both to those on Zoom and in the room. You can raise hands. Okay, I have at least one to start. All right, Luke, why not go ahead? Get us started. Thank you. Yeah, sure.
All right, thank you for providing such a rich, fertile ground for discussion. It's such a fun topic, both for an onlooker and for somebody who's sort of interested in the discourse to begin with. Gosh, I really have an arsenal of questions that have been building up throughout this. But I just want to comment as somebody who does work on Burke that I really find very fun this idea that, well, we should really convince the liberal progressives to just be a Burkean conservative about this point, regarding the sort of the use for morality, right? Well, this is working for the benefit of women, so we should keep the sort of creepiness as it is. That's quite fun. Let's see.
You discovered you read between the lines, right? Because then the next idea is, wait a minute, what else have we already gotten rid of that we shouldn't have gotten rid of because we weren't thinking this way? Yeah.
Sure. My one concern here is I think when you're talking about liberals and progressives, there was a little bit of not necessarily between the lines stuff here, but I'll call it, try to be squishy. I'll try to be conscientious, careful, gentle here when I say that it's almost like there's an invocation of a liberal hive mind, right? You're shifting between sort of what the general public consensus seems to be and what scholars who would call themselves or subscribe to liberal thought seem to say. And this is getting into, I guess, what we could call in like the terminally online sense, the bodies and spaces talk, right? Where we basically it's another meme, right? Where you use this sort of therapy speak or corporate speak or HR lingo, like when we're saying, we're adding isms and lookism or lookist, etc., like that sort of thing. And we need to make a distinction between, as academics and philosophers, talking about these concepts and where it's used in the common parlance, right? So we have a tension there between the use of creepiness and what that's used in common parlance, and then what we're trying to get at when we describe the weaponization of creepiness, for example, or these other ideas that are in the social milieu that we inhabit, with regards to things like lookism or ageism, etc. That would be my concern there. Say maybe a little bit more about that.
So are you worried like I'm making a straw
hasty
man?
generalization.
Straw manning?
We'll say
liberals?
hasty generalization.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think so. There are just a few things written in philosophy about creepiness.
Right. Yeah, it's underdeveloped.
Right. So one of them written, co-authored by two young progressive philosophers, gives analyzes creepiness in a way that is highly revisionary. And they view it as basically like a lack of moral conscientiousness. And they're pretty explicit in saying the reason why we're being so revisionary in our understanding of creepiness is that it tends to be neurotypical.
Yeah.
It's and right. So there, and the Cern of Assen. And I do think I'm not strawmanning too much that progressive unease with how it's being.
Yeah, no, I'd completely agree with you there. Like you're correctly identifying there's a serious tension, like a contradiction, if we want to get Marxist here, right? Okay. Where we hold these values allegedly, or liberals do, and if we want to be fair to that and be consistent on that point, then yeah, you need to make these concessions. And the reason why we don't, I think you're saying, is because this creepiness is socially useful. It's socially protective, etc. Let's see. Right. And if we could go back to sort of the very start of your, I mean, don't actually need to move the slides. I'll just sort of talk about it when we're talking about the sort of sexual creepiness and sexual assault, sexual harassment in the Anglosphere. I think yeah, God, I love that white knight meme there.
The traits that.
I think before this, it doesn't matter over much. I just wanted to point out, sort of in the body of feminist literature and feminist epistemology, trying to situate knowledge in like the sort of male hetero sense, and then in the female sense, which I think you do pretty good justice to. There's a sense that for men, there's like the stakes have become very high for becoming labeled as a creep, etc. Whereas also for women, the stakes are high for getting this sort of spidey sense wrong, right? Where someone could mistake, a man could mistake a woman's just being polite with response to like declining a sexual proposition for reciprocation of a sexual interest. And then the corresponding labels of, exactly, no guy really worries about being labeled as sexual assaultist, or actually sexually assaulting someone, or actually being whatever it was at the very start. You can go there.
I see what you mean.
But again, you mentioned that potential for being labeled a creep is super deleterious, right? It harms your reputation, etc. So I think what I wanted to say, let's see. Sorry, that was a bit of a diatribe. The other point I want to bring up, where we're talking about sort of, let's get like Burkean about this, regarding like the roles of like dating culture back, when there wasn't really dating, it was the courtships, etc. David Graeber's got this fun book about like the origin of debt, etc., where one element of his analysis is that women essentially began as property, and then the dating culture erupted from that, of basically saying, well, I'm, as the man of the house, I need to pretend like I need to protect my investment, my daughters, etc., whose value is their virginity, from potential other male suitors. And so it's kind of a property protection mechanism. So when we say liberalized marketplace, what we're trying to say is, well, okay, great. So God, how to get at this in a sense, how to put it, like the sort of capitalist logic has sort of come into that element of our lives in a way that we haven't really taken account of yet. So we haven't really built up norms to replace the traditional norms, I think, that you're getting at. And that's a concern. That's where creepiness is sort of coming into the discourse, right? Because it's trying to establish a new norm for that protection, but for the sake of women rather than for the sake of their fathers who are protecting an investment.
I see. Okay. Yeah, I mean, right. Yeah, so what you're saying is it's property either way, maybe, like it's too much. There's an interesting property metaphor we're working with. It's just now you go from your father's property to your own property, and liberalism is saying you're your own property, your sexuality is your own property to deal with as you wish, but of course, you're a hot property. And so you're forced to defend your own property. On my view, young women are being forced to defend their own property themselves, in a way that they didn't have to before.
Right. And then I guess the flip sense of that is that we still have cultural artifacts where men feel entitled to that property, air quotes.
Oh.
And then
but if they feel entitled, I don't feel. Sometimes I hear this being said. I would want to hear more about why just asking a girl out is feeling entitled. So what we see is men being called creepy for, just approaching a girl and asking her out. Why? Because they're
right, because they fit. They have one of they have one of those markers attached to them that marks them as creepy.
Not, you're not like, how dare you? Try that. So.
It's.
I don't know. Is that entitlement? I don't know. There is this weird psychological. There are all sorts of weird things going on. One is that, okay, and this is actually a strategy on dating. Like, suppose I'm just looking to have easy sex on Tinder. Most girls don't want a direct sexual proposition, and most girls will be annoyed by it. But the technology allows me to just spam 100,000 girls with, hey, you want to fuck? Hey, you want to fuck? Hey, you want to fuck? And they're like, oh no, you creep out, but whatever. And just getting past those 999 girls to get to that one who will say yes. It's a strategy. Then there's also this psychological feature called male overperception bias, where men will, oh, and you alluded to it earlier, but that's the name of it, where men view themselves as more attractive than they are, or any sort of positive reaction from a woman is interpreted as, hey, maybe she'll have sex with me, maybe she's interested in me, and so even well-meaning men who aren't just looking for that are going to go for women out of their league, who they don't have a chance with, but they
Right.
do.
And then a lot of the difficulty there for men is that it's difficult to understand what is labeling them as creepy in that sense, right? Is this sort of ambiguity of how the term is actually applied and what markers women look for when they apply the label. And so because there's not really, I guess, a discussion of saying, like, here's common vocabulary we're using to identify these sort of, okay. I see where this is a really fulfilling project. Another just fun, quick thing is this sort of creepiness thing can be described by that meme where it's, the woman sitting at her desk and attractive man comes by and says, hey, Susan. And then she's like, oh, hi, whoever. And then the next one is like a larger, more rotund fellow with greasy hair says, hey, Susan. And she goes, hello, HR, like,
Right.
reporting a sexual abuse. Right. Thanks much.
Oh,
I'll
thank
yield
you.
my time.
Yep.
Over to you, Victoria.
Well, thanks very much. Prior to today, I thought that creepiness was something that applied to spiders and snakes and Nosferatu. So my eyes are opened. I like this general idea of applying a fictionalist approach to it, but I just wonder how far you think the phenomenology of creepiness bears that out. Have there been any studies of the phenomenology of creepiness? Is there a unified picture emerging, and does that fit with the fictionalist idea?
This is going to be a worry for any fictionalism, I think, right? Which is like, okay, if feeling creeped out by a guy is the, and by the way, we need to have more, we need to have, as far as I know, any psychological research on what do men feel when they think someone's creepy versus women. I think a lot of men really don't have much creepiness phenomenology at all. And so we need to, there's interesting work on gender differences in emotions and gender differences in morality, and this might be a really big delta between men and women. But yeah, so the worry is like, it's sort of the idea that, well, if I'm a fictionalist about it, am I still getting like the hair raising sort of whatever it is that women feel when, maybe some women here could talk about what they feel when they feel like a guy's being creepy. But things I have read women say is they feel like they want to shut down. So it's sort of, like these basic survivor emotions of flee, fight, freeze. So it's more in that freeze element. They freeze a lot and they don't know what to say, and they're just afraid of whatever they're going to do might elicit violence or something like that. So I think that's part of it.
That does seem more extreme than just finding someone unattractive.
Yes, right. So so if we're fictionalists about it, like what would our phenomenology look like if we were fictionalists about it? Would an analogy be like, well, if I'm like the atheist who is pro-religion and willing to talk and even engage in sin talk, but I don't literally believe in sin. I don't have maybe that sense of the taboo when I eat the pork or do something on the Sabbath. Maybe I just lack the phenomenology, but I just keep going along with it. And I get good at knowing what the people who are the true believers want to pick out as those things. and avoid those. So likewise, I may say, oh, well, he's acting kind of creepy. I didn't have the feeling myself, but yeah, he's doing the things that people who are true believers in it call creepy. And so he was being creepy, you know, fictionally, you know, I mean, I guess that's what you would do. And I know from the guys I talked to who probably have never felt creepiness with respect to a man, you know, they do kind of say, oh yeah, he was being kind of creepy, or dude, that's being kind of creepy, you know, and they too sort of imbibe in the language to some degree, even though they themselves don't have the phenomenology. But yeah, I don't know if I got the answer.
Okay, do we use the word creepy to refer to women? It's only for men.
It is, as that McAndrew quote says, it's he begins the whole essay on how to avoid creeping women out. Let's face it, it does not take very much for a guy to look like a creep. Women, on the other hand, really have to show you something spectacular before the word creepy is used. So it, you know, here's the top researcher on it, and he's like, yeah, it's pretty rare for a woman to be called creepy.
Okay. And also another question I want to ask, since English not my first language, what's the differences between words like a creepiness and say pervertness or like a kinkiness? Say a guy, can I say, when I say guy, kink, you talk about kinky sex. I don't know, do you say a person being kinky or no? You don't use that.
It is the person kinky. Yeah, we don't say,
Okay.
yeah.
But you can say pervert, right? He's a pervert.
Yeah, kink, I think, yeah, kink is supposed to mean, correct me, those of you who have more elaborate views on this, but I think kinkiness is like a non-pejorative use.
Okay.
And then perversion would be the pejorative use, but they may have the same targets, you know. So if you're very conservative, you might view, you know, tying up in leather and so forth as perverse. And then to someone else, oh no, I'm just into kink, you know, and people proudly say, oh, I'm into kink, I'm in the kink lifestyle and stuff like that. They don't mean it to be.
And also like, I don't know, like say a homophobia person, would that kind of person call gay people creepy?
Yeah, I think, yeah. I mean, if you're in a highly heterosexual culture, you might, you'll probably view mere homosexual interest as being creepy, and, you know, have the view that, well, just I'm a guy and this guy's interested in me, and now suddenly I feel like, wait, he's a potential threat, or, you know, is he interested in me sexually or not? And does that mean, you know, maybe.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of what's the Chinese equivalent for
Yeah,
creepy.
that'd be
Creepiness.
good.
I don't know if anybody can help. We have Chinese student here. Do we have an equivalent for creepy? I don't know. Sometimes we say 渣男, but that would be a little bit different, right? 变态. Okay.
What's the meaning here is it's supposed to like being abnormal instead of being creepy.
Could be okay.
But it's also widely used to describe a vow or a vow of this as an interest in sexual as well.
Okay, so there may be something close. Maybe. Okay, good. Do you find that accusation is on the rise?
Not quite, but this is probably because the counter background quite different from the expected like so yes the marketplace for sexuality, because it's not as visual,
Right.
as like American. It's quite different.
Right.
Well, perhaps I can insert myself into the queue. So we do have a bit of time, I think. Just want to make sure I'm okay. This isn't a well-formed question. I guess I'm trying to think ahead to where this discussion might go, and I've been fixated a bit on what you yourself admitted to as being a certain subtext here in your exchange with Luke, where the thought is, you know, look how much of a burden has been placed on creepiness ascriptions to do the work of allowing women to sort of have some measure of control over, you know, the kinds of sexual propositions they receive. And, you know, maybe what's lamentable, at least in part, about this situation is that we got rid of too many other mechanisms. Liberalism got rid of too many other mechanisms that would allow women to do this. So then the thought is, okay, or at least one possible thought for looking forward is, which of these other possible, you know, norms that we threw out ought to maybe be resuscitated? And then I guess I'm just thinking, is there really anything going forward in the debate special about creepiness, or will taking that line of thought to its logical conclusion just bring us back to debating these old sexual normative standards or
Really
or what
good,
have you?
really
Yeah.
good question. Excellent question. All right, so like imagine that there were all these old filters to protect young women and redirect men's sexual interests in positive ways for women and so forth, and they were removed by liberalism, but one got left behind, or one of a few got left behind: creepiness. You know, this one screen. Why? Well, plausibly because creepiness connoted this danger, this violence idea, which liberals do take seriously, right? Liberalism absolutely does take violence and aggression and stuff seriously. They almost take nothing else seriously. That's why they're, for instance, reinterpreting mere offensiveness as microaggressions, right? They have to put this idea of violence and you know, silence is violence and words are violence and all sorts of stuff they don't want is violence. Now they have to tag that on everything in order to get moral purchase, because they're, you know, if you're a liberal, rather than just, well, that's rude, you know, because, well, then free speech, what do you mean? Who cares about rude and offense? Well, you know, no, it's microaggression, or it's words or violence or something like that. So, okay. Creepiness made it because it connoted this idea of vague violence or ambiguous threat. Okay, so that was around, and so now that's the last thing that they could throw at everybody, right? That they don't like. So, yeah, that's the idea. So, that may be a reason why it was left behind, and still remains. Second thing to say, should we go back to some of these older ones? Yeah, I mean, I think so, but I mean that's going to be you know, then we get into the whole, you know, well, is liberalism right or wrong, and, you know, so forth. But yeah, I definitely, you know, I do think that there's some old, not all of them, but some sexual norms that we should probably get back to, for the sake of social harmony and social success, to get reproductive norms going so that we start having more children. I'm worried about birth rates. I'm worried about lonely people. I'm worried about your generation. I'm unhappy that there's so much loneliness in your generation, my students as well. I think it's very bad. I think it's harming our mental health. Obviously, it's important to reproduce. We don't need 10 billion people, but we need people. And so there's so much misery that I think some of these norms have been harmful. It's been bad that we've gotten rid of some of them. Yeah. One of the, and like another interesting one is like simping, right? So you're in the West, there's this simping norm that's come up. Okay. And like, what's wrong with that? And, you know, and well, or, you know, so people aren't crazy. Like people will come up with terms for things they don't like and things that are harmful, and whether or not they square with your overall moral ideology. And so we have to interrogate new ones like simping, and you know, maybe look again at some old ones like sluttiness, for instance. You know, sluttiness was about women being giving away something valuable without being discerning about it. So giving away sex, which was valuable for women, not valuable for men. Again, this was hard to talk about maybe 30 years ago because people were kind of egalitarian about sex and unrealistic, but we now know that like male sexuality has no value. Like there's like no premium on male sexuality. You could get male sex anytime you want. It's female sex that's scarce, right? And so sluttiness was meant to say, hey, if you give sex, make sure you're getting something for the sex, because female sex is rare and precious and hard to get. Male sex isn't. So you can't be a male slut, but you can be a female slut. Liberals didn't like that because it's, you know, sounds sexist and egalitarian, but there's a wisdom there. Maybe simping is the male equivalent of sluttiness, right? I mean, so this is not a new idea with me, but it's being said that the male simp, the guy who like is paying these girls on OnlyFans to spend their money, and, you know, and who these girls hate them, they make fun of them, whatever, but he's sending them hundreds of dollars to give him just a little bit of fake attention. He's being foolish. He's being made fun of. He's being called a simp because he doesn't understand his money's valuable and what she has to give to him isn't. And, you know, he needs to be smarter about giving what's valuable to him, which is money. And so, you know, like if we get more realistic about male-female differences, we'll realize, okay, there are different sorts of predictable pitfalls that men will make. There are different sorts of predictable pitfalls women will make. Maybe we need some terms to help stigmatize that sort of prudentially bad. If you don't think it's morally bad, it's at least right. And I think it's really prudentially bad. And the morality was meant to capture and put some force behind the foolish behavior as opposed to immoral behavior. And so we might want to start bringing back some of those in a more thoughtful way.
Oh, someone reads, creepy man can be funny, but it's common. We learn what creepiness is by second order observation. Maybe we can maybe we can look at how creepy men or women are being represented in the media or discourse to see changes and developments.
Right. Yeah, definitely. And the age difference one is a big one. Like, and those of us who are of a certain age can remember times when an older man going after a younger woman would not be called creepy. And you know, there are movies with leading men doing it and so forth as characters, not just the actual actors being older, but, you know, and, you know, is viewed as totally fine. Even as recently as the 1990s, that movie, As Good as It Gets, with, what's his name? I forget that actor's name. Yeah, Jack Nicholson. Like, I mean, there's like this all over, right? This is, it wasn't being called creepy. You could like that guy. That never came up. And now it's gotten to this extreme point where even a 10-year age difference. And look, my wife's only 2 years younger than I am. I mean, I'm innocent of this one. But I mean, you know, it's gotten extreme about these age differences, which is really making me think that, look, it maybe has something to do with that redirection hypothesis. So, yep. I think that's one way that creepiness norms have really obviously changed, and someone who's clever about big data could prove it.
Okay, I am going to call an end to the official portion of this Q&A and ask us to once again thank our speaker for his time.
Thank you. Thank you. I look forward to talking to you later on.
Yeah, my understanding is we still have the room. So I know there was another question. So maybe if you still have the time and energy, some of us can stick around. Yeah. Okay. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.